Survivor Pools, Week 11 in the NFL. If you survived Week 10, congratulations. You're joining me, Statsational, with Scratching and Surviving, the best analysis in the industry today. Coming up next. All right, guys, it is Scratching and Surviving time. I am Statsational for the Sharp app, former professional trader on Wall Street in currencies, turned professional sports bettor and DFS player, and now bringing you guys the Sharp app as well as some of the best Survivor content on the web today. If you have not downloaded the Sharp app, guys, appreciate the download. Check it out. If you're a sports bettor, it's going to help you in all aspects of sports betting, especially in props. We've got something called the Proptimizer, and if you play on whether it's any of the sports books or you play Underdog or you play DraftKings Pick 6 or Fliff or Prize Picks, Sleeper, any of those websites, we've got you covered. We've got a specific tool for each one of those, so check it out. Download the Sharp app at the.sharp.app or sharp.app. Use code SURVIVE35. It's going to get you 35% off, and then say hello to me in our Discord at Statsational. All right, guys, this week, unusual week here because I kind of like the same team in all formats. We'll go over it now in a second. Let's just kind of run down the top teams this week from a win percentage standpoint. As always, I've got Survivor Grid up. If you guys don't know the website, survivorgrid.com if you're new. And most of you are coming back each and every week, which I always appreciate. And, of course, you're only coming back if you are still alive in your pool. So those numbers diminish as we go along in the season. If you are new, though, appreciate the like and subscribe, because even if we get knocked out here in the near future, and we hope you don't, I'll be back next year as well. Plus, I'm going to have a whole lot more educational content, sports betting-wise. We've got that all here on the Sharp Apps YouTube channel. Now, this week, Detroit, 85% chance of winning, according to Survivor Grid. My number is always going to be slightly different, and I base that off of the Sharp app. I look for the mid-price between on the money line for these games, but we're going to be in the same ballpark here. You see Detroit, the largest favorite we've had really for the entire season, against Jacksonville at home. There's no layups. There's no guaranteed wins, but when we get to 2 touchdown favorites in the NFL, pretty close to as sure a thing as you're going to get. But 15% of the time, we're going to lose this game. All right, so Detroit looks to be the best option this week, at least without looking at any future weeks. Houston at Dallas, 7.5-point favorite, about 76% chance to win. You could see that Houston potentially a team that will take in Week 12 at home against Tennessee. You got San Francisco, 71% chance or almost 72% chance to win against Seattle, nearly a touchdown favorite. Actually, let me sort this better, because I skipped out on Miami here as a 7.5-point favorite against Vegas. So these are your two top teams, Detroit and Miami, getting 62% of the action. It may be even higher than that as we get closer to game time. But when you see not as many, what I think you're going to see here is Houston garnering a bit more attention as the week goes on. Dallas, we've seen look terrible. Backup quarterback Cooper Kupp is in there. These teams are really close as far as win percentage, both around 76%. So what you'll probably see is Houston really join the mix here, and I think surpass probably Green Bay as the third choice before it's all said and done. But we'll see. That's why you always want to kind of stick with Survivor Grid as the week goes on to get a better picture as to where we're at. But what people are looking at is the potential value here of Houston in the future. As we talked about, Tennessee next week at home, of course, a pretty good option. But at Jacksonville, don't necessarily love that game yet. Then they've got a bye. They're going to be home from Miami. You're not going to like that. At Kansas City, certainly not. Baltimore, no. Maybe when we get to Week 18. But if you're in a small pool, certainly, we're only looking at Week 11, 12, and 13. Small pool being, 20 people left or so in your pool or less. We don't want to look too far out. If we are in a medium-sized pool, that's the one where I go on the spreadsheet and I kind of look at a 25%-ish future value weight. Maybe that changes a bit. And then if you're in a larger pool, perhaps changes even more. That's when I weigh the spreadsheet at about 100%. We'll get to that spreadsheet in a second. But let's look here. What's my optimal path? If I take Detroit, we've got 5.5 to 6 points better, maybe almost close to a 10% better win percentage odds on Detroit. But you see, we've got some options here. They're at Indianapolis next week and then home for Chicago in Week 13. Do we have to, or do we need to pass up on Detroit this week in order to maybe take them as a better option in Week 12 or 13? Well, let's kind of look at Week 12. Now, we already kind of penciled in last week Kansas City as an option here for Week 12 that we wanted to save. That's why we didn't like Kansas City necessarily last week, because we wanted to make sure we had them for Week 12. But now you see kind of Washington emerging as an even bigger favorite against Dallas. We talked about just how bad Dallas has been. And now you could almost wait now on Kansas City next week and use them in Week 13 against Vegas at home. That's a Thanksgiving game. I think it's either Thanksgiving night or the Black Friday game. But either or, if you're in Circa, certainly that's been one that the people in Circa have been circling for quite some time, because you are forced in Circa to take either the Thanksgiving or Black Friday game as its own week. So there's essentially 20 weeks in Circa, because Christmas works the same way. So you're kind of forced into a small amount of games. You've got to pick one, and obviously Kansas City is going to be the best option there on Thanksgiving weekend or the Thanksgiving Day, Black Friday slate of games. When we look at next week, with Washington emerging as a pretty solid second choice, if you do have Washington available, let's assume we've got Detroit, Washington, and Kansas City available to us. The optimal line is going to be Detroit Week 11, Washington Week 12, and then Kansas City Week 13. It's a very obvious way to go. Now, even though Washington's going to be good in Week 13, Detroit's pretty much good in Week 11, 12, and 13. That's your optimal path right now. It looks very easy. So if I were in any small pool, for sure, I'm taking Detroit this week. I'm taking Detroit against Jacksonville this week, and I'm taking Washington next week. Now, if I don't have that option, if I don't have Detroit, that's where we got to start making some decisions. It's going to be between Houston and Miami for me, and I'm going to really want to wait and see where the market goes as far as the win percentages, as well as how these pick percentages pan out. Certainly at a 32-8 number, Houston's the obvious choice. Now, I know you could take them next week, but it's tough to pass up on the leverage. With all things being equal, you're not really losing much if you don't have the ability to take Washington next week, and you don't have Kansas City available to you, and you really had to make a choice between Houston and Miami this week. Then I still like taking, if Houston, and I think there will be a higher percentage when it's all said and done. Maybe they don't surpass Miami, and if this is really close as far as win percentage as it is now, I'd probably want to take that leverage spot there. So that's the only thinking that I think we really have to do this week, is if we don't have Detroit, and then just kind of take a look. Do you have Washington available? Do you have Kansas City available? That's going to be my path here for Week 11, 12, and 13. Oftentimes we're looking for that contrarian play, and sometimes we just don't want to do that. If the optimal choice, even in all formats, even in a large format, if the optimal choice is just so good that we really don't gain much by getting off of that choice, let others kind of pick themselves off by taking some of the suboptimal choices. So let's take a look at the spreadsheet. I've got it here at 100%, and we can update that to 0%, which is where we typically like to start. And you can see Houston is the second choice right now. It's just really close between Miami and Houston, and that would kind of flip-flop depending on where the lines go. But it's either or right now. And, of course, Detroit as the number one option. Now, the column I want you to look at is the threshold column, and why I say Detroit is such a strong play. Even getting about a third of the picks this week, we'd still, in order to fade them, we'd have to take a team over 80% win percentage, and no other team offers that for us this week. So it's going to be really tough to get yourself off of Detroit. You'd have to be in a pool where you just were confident that everyone, if there's 15 people left in your pool, and you were just confident that 12 of them, let's say, were going to be on Detroit. In that case, potentially you'd be in a situation where you could get off of the chalky favorite, but of course, nearly impossible unless you knew what everyone else's pick was going to be. It's going to be nearly impossible for you to go ahead and know that and determine that. So I would think in most pools we're going to see a similar kind of about 30, maybe increase to up 40%. Like I said, we're going to get a bump up probably on Houston, I think, when it's all said and done, which means they'll take away from some of the Miami ownership. But let's see how that plays out as the week goes. But my suggestion here in pretty much all formats is going to be Detroit. We'll bump this up to 25% so you can see it. Doesn't change things drastically. It's going to move Miami ahead just because of this future value. And we talked about, we showed Miami and Houston. Their future value is in the next couple of weeks. There's not a whole lot towards the tail end. So it's really a coin flip between the two. And, the edge for me is going to just be the fact that less people are picking Houston. And I kind of like that route, even though I'm going to be maybe taking a lesser team in Miami next week, but we'll see how that line plays out. It's just so close that the advantage to me, as it sits right now, is on Houston. If I had to make that determination between the two teams, if we bump this up to, let's say, 100%, of course you see things drastically change, and then the Rams become an option. Let's just kind of take a look at the Survivor grid. What do the Rams look like here for the future? Rams, obviously this week, not a massive favorite, only 66.3% chance to win. I forget what I had them here on my sheet, but I've got the Rams pretty much at the same, 66.3. And you don't have much value going forward. You got Philly, you're not going to take them. At New Orleans, unlikely. Buffalo, no. San Francisco, no. At the Jets, probably not. Arizona at home, it looks like we've got better options. That's all the way out into Week 17. And Seattle at home, probably not as well. So, I mean, really, this may be your only option left to take New England or to take the Rams at New England. Not my favorite choice. If you're in a super large pool and you're just looking to get yourself different, perhaps what are some of the other teams that we could differentiate ourselves with this week? You've got San Francisco only being taken by 4.1%, but look at all the options we have for San Francisco. You're going to have Week 14 against Chicago if you've got them available to you. The same Rams team in Week 15, potentially. I don't know if I necessarily love that game. But we have a really strong game here in Week 14 for San Francisco. Green Bay, they host Miami. Not the greatest choice. We already talked about Week 13, the options that we have there. But New Orleans in Week 16 at home looks very strong. Minnesota, you're going to have a few options. Again, we've kind of got 12 and 13 mapped out. But home for Atlanta and then home for Chicago, Weeks 14 and 15, definitely viable. So we've got options with these other teams. And of course, you're going to have to gear this towards what you have available, but I'm trying to speak to the masses here. More than likely, you're going to kind of stay away from the San Fran, Green Bay, Minnesota. You could potentially get the Rams. It would have to be a super large pool for me where I'm just really hoping for some chaos up on the top. But I think in all formats, it's going to be tough for me to get off of Detroit. I think I'm going to kind of stick chalky here for this week. Take Detroit, move on. And again, if you don't have that option, that's where you're going to want to comment down below. Ask me questions as far as your particular pool, which way we think we're going to have to maneuver. Some of you have double picks, and that starts either this week or next week or future weeks. That may change how we're going to go about this, of course. So it's always going to be dependent on your pool in particular. One thing I didn't look at was, let's see who the late game is this week, if that does make any changes to our decision making, because sometimes we like to look at the late game, and I know we had I know they shifted the Jet game, or what do they call it? They basically took the Jet game out of the prime time. So we've got the Dallas-Houston game. So there you go. I mean, there is an option there for a hedge opportunity. It is the last game. Houston is a potential play here, but I don't think it's worthwhile in a heads-up situation at all to get down to Houston just for the hedge. I think we stick with Detroit, and if you're heads up or you've got just very few people, I think it's going to really take. Let's go to the spreadsheet, and it's going to take quite a few people for this threshold to get us down. If we knock this down or put this up to like 80%. That's a situation where, okay, we could get off of Detroit. So 80% would be if you knew 4 out of the 5 people in your pool remaining were all going to be on Detroit, then we could take a shot here, and I would do it with the Houston because I could take a hedge. If Detroit were to lose that game, I could hedge it, right? So it's going to have to take a really significant amount of people in the pool. Even if you're 50% of your pool is going to be on Detroit. We've still got to take a team at 75%, which is really, we're kind of borderline here with Miami and Houston. So it's unlikely in most pools here that we're going to be in that situation. And we'll bring it back to where it was. I just don't see Detroit in most situations being a team that we don't want to take. So I like Detroit here. If you cannot take Detroit and you want to look at other options, or your pool is somehow different with the rules and whatnot, we can talk about that as well down in the comments. So as always, appreciate you guys hanging in there with me each and every week, scratching and surviving. Like these videos, subscribe. I know a lot of you are here every week and have yet to subscribe, so we'd appreciate that. Subscribe. And until next week, let's hope you are still alive, one step closer, and maybe even winning it all this week in your pools. Good luck, everybody.